An iconic cathedral goes up in flames during renovations. Notre Dame's spire and roof destroyed by a blaze. Bushfires ravage large parts of Australia and the Amazon. Leaders from the world's 20 richest economies meet in Osaka. The US and EU spar over how to describe the climate crisis. Climate negotiators meet in Madrid for the UN's annual conference, but leave without a deal on carbon emissions. A 16-year-old Swedish environmentalist shames world leaders at the UN.
How dare you?
Time magazine names young climate activist Greta Thunberg its Person of the Year. And one of the Southern Hemisphere's worst tropical storms wreaks catastrophic damage in Mozambique, Madagascar, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. Cyclone Idai leaves in its wake more than 1,300 people dead. The UN warns 1 million species are at risk of extinction. Months of protests in Iraq leave hundreds dead. Demonstrators denounce corruption and Iranian influence. Meanwhile, in Iran, hundreds are killed in demonstrations sparked by a sharp hike in fuel prices. Attacks on tankers in the Gulf heighten tensions between Washington and Tehran. British troops seize an Iranian oil tanker off the coast of Gibraltar. Iran seizes a British tanker in return. Terror strikes New Zealand, where 51 people are killed in 2 mosque shootings.
This is one of New Zealand's darkest days.
And Sri Lanka, where coordinated suicide bombs blast the peace of Easter Sunday. 3 churches and 3 luxury hotels the targets. 259 people dead, among them 45 foreign nationals. China marks 70 years since the founding of the People's Republic. Kim Jong-un engages in diplomacy, a historic meeting with Donald Trump and a summit with Vladimir Putin. The DPRK leader also makes another trip to China. Russia and Ukraine exchange prisoners. Their conflict, Europe's only war, continues. The situation in Venezuela continues to deteriorate. Separately, protests spread across much of Latin America.
The bill is dead.
Months of demonstrations in Hong Kong put the regional government and Beijing in the global spotlight. Protests in Pakistan as New Delhi changes the rules on Indian-controlled Kashmir and introduces a crackdown on the disputed territory. Unrest in Lebanon, triggered by plans to tax data calls, then shifts to targeting the entire ruling elite. Algerians boot their longtime leader and vote in a new one, but protesters say the election was a charade, with military heads picking the president. The head of the so-called Libyan National Army orders his troops to march on Tripoli, taking on the internationally backed government and triggering the country's second civil war. Anti-government protesters fill the streets of Khartoum after President Omar al-Bashir is overthrown and arrested by armed forces. Russian S-400 air defense missile hardware arrives in Turkey, despite opposition from the U.S. Voters in Istanbul pick Ekrem İmamoğlu as mayor for the second time. President Erdogan's AK Party challenged the first results after their preferred candidate lost. Israelis failed twice to elect a government. A third election was called for early next year. Canada's Justin Trudeau wins re-election, but fails to secure a majority. Finland elects the world's youngest prime minister, a 34-year-old woman named Sanna Marin. Ukraine elects a comedian as president. Volodymyr Zelensky's call with Donald Trump leads to the American leader's impeachment. British Prime Minister Theresa May resigns.
I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
An internal Tory vote ushers in Boris Johnson as her replacement. He then wins re-election, striking a blow to Jeremy Corbyn's Labour and taking the UK one step closer to leaving the EU. After 3 decades on the throne, Japan's Emperor Akihito abdicates, something that hasn't happened in more than 200 years. Son Naruhito now reigns. Western leaders gather in Normandy to mark the 75th anniversary of D-Day. Trump's trade war against China rattles the world's 2 biggest economies and leaves global markets uncertain. A man in the UK becomes free of the HIV virus after receiving a stem cell blood transplant. It comes a decade after the so-called Berlin patient received a similar treatment, giving new hope to patients.
修正通过。
Taiwan legalizes same-sex marriage, the first place in Asia to do so. Brunei's Sultan introduces death by stoning for those convicted of gay sexual relations, but then reverses his decision after widespread international protests. 39 Vietnamese nationals are found inside the back of a truck on the outskirts of London. British police say the victims were being trafficked. Italy arrests the captain of a ship that rescues migrants and brings them to shore. The migrants are allowed to disembark after weeks of pushback. Terrorists attack a hotel in Nairobi, leaving 21 people dead. Houthi fighters attack a military parade in Yemen, killing 30. Repeated Boko Haram attacks in the Sahel leave a growing number of troops dead, as leaders from the region's 5 countries struggle to join forces and fight back. The death toll from Ebola tops 2,000 in the DR Congo. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for helping end the 20-year post-war stalemate with neighboring Eritrea. Boeing grounds its 737 MAX passenger jet after 2 deadly crashes and said it's temporarily shutting down production. The jet still awaits recertification to fly, but Boeing's CEO won't be there for the takeoff. He was fired. China's Chang'e 4 probe makes galactic history, a soft landing on the far side of the moon. The first ever image of a black hole is unveiled. It's 3 million times the size of Earth. Scientists call it a monster. And black is beautiful. For the first time, black women win the crown at all 5 major beauty pageants. And that is the world this year and the world today.